Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special meeting of the Town of Richmond Select Board, this being Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. This is our first meeting to specifically deal with next year's budget. So before I begin, I just want to mention that we're going to be throwing around some numbers. This is all very preliminary. This is the meeting where we put everything on the table that we want, and then we figure out what we can really afford and start picking it away. So don't be alarmed if you see some initial estimates. This is just, if we had all the money in the world and we could afford everything, this is what we want. And then we pick out based on what we feel we need. Before I begin with tonight's warned agenda, just a couple of housekeeping items. I am on call tonight, so I might go beep, 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 and dart out of the room, and I'll just pass everything to Lisa. I apologize for that. When I set my schedule, I forgot that I had a meeting on this Tuesday because usually I'm on call on Tuesdays. Want to throw a quick thank you out. We were just discussing before the meeting. Somebody was trying to impress himself with his lack of driving skills and was driving very carelessly over the weekend and launched his car, which landed in my driveway. And Richmond Fire Department and Richmond Heinsberg Police and our local hero Rod West showed up. Nobody was hurt or injured or even worse, killed, and everything was handled safely. So thank you, everybody, for keeping our town safe. Before we begin, would anybody care to make a public comment? Jack, come on up. We can't hear you back there because of the microphone.
I can't hear you.
And we can, but that people.
I did have the wax cleared out, but I would hope people would speak up because it's not just amongst yourselves to talk.
Mhm.
And the second point, I'm here to represent Lake Iroquois Association, but I noticed you don't have anything in there for Lake Iroquois Recreation District.
Did you guys apply?
What?
Did you apply?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
We'll have to
So,
check. I don't know that we got a district. I don't know if we had a Lake Iroquois.
Actually, we do.
district
It's right here.
application. Is there?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
here.
Oh, is it a voted on topic though?
It's
So it goes in
item
the budget every
three
year.
B 7H.
Yeah, so that might be, let me see.
come up later.
Yeah, we can talk about it under appropriations.
It's on the list.
When it's under appropriations, we can
Okay.
talk about it.
Okay,
Anything else, Jack?
Yeah.
I got lots of things, but
Okay.
I always do.
Okay.
David, I have one follow-up
Go ahead.
comment. This is a parking lot comment, if you will. That as we talk about microphones and future state of this conference room, some sort of current state ADA compliant conference rooms have speakers like connectivity to hearing aids and stuff for people who
Mhm.
have difficulty hearing. So it's something we might explore. I put that in a parking lot for a future consideration.
That's a very good point.
And the last, just to close with that, I first saw that at the Vermont Center for Independent Living in something like 1998. So the technology's been around a little bit.
Yeah.
Last
Remember
church-
payphones?
The last church I went to before my current one had FM. They were basically on an FM band,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean,
tune.
you could tune to it.
Just
Right.
before payphones disappeared, I don't know if you noticed, a lot of the newer payphones, right before they all disappeared, had the text-to-speech screens on them
Mhm.
for hearing impaired people. I only saw a few, and then a payphone, what's that? Any other comments before we begin? I don't see anything out in virtual Zoom land. Adam Laptop, is that you?
Well,
Adam
he's
Wood?
Adam Wood and Adam Laptop.
Oh, okay, we have two Adams. Okay. It's getting into our warned agenda. Josh Board, any additions, deletions, or modifications to the agenda? Bart?
Yeah, David, what I don't see, and we usually take up, we were starting to discuss it, is what's our kind of target for inflationary index? And maybe add that as a front end, like more or less what's our target, or maybe a future agenda item to nail it down in terms of specific source.
Maybe we can talk about that under, like, I wanted to sort of give an overview before we got into the budget. So we could talk about like a general overview and then talk about that and then get into the budget.
Makes sense to me. Thank you.
I know in years past, we've tried to pair the upcoming budget with annual cost of living parity, not to exceed. We work very hard to strive for that. I would encourage we do that again this year. This is just a blanket statement before we dive in. As Josh said, we'll address that later on.
David, I'd add one comment. Sorry, I'm over here grabbing Jay's. Thank you today. The other thing that got my attention to this is the Burlington City Council in June approved a budget which is a roughly 11% tax increase for property taxpayers in Burlington.
Wow.
And that does not include school at all, right? That's just.
Well, it was inclusive. We put the two together.
Okay.
And that's on top of, I think, an 8% increase last year. So a precedent we might seek to avoid.
Yeah.
Don't want to get too far into it with this superficial view, but I will point out that Burlington was anticipating a lot of municipal savings and they cut back in the last 5 years. And I suspect that some of this cost might be restoring services that were deemed necessary and essential that had been underfunded for a few years, but just putting that out there. Okay, getting into tonight's warrant agenda, consideration of approval of the 2025 health insurance plans for town staff. Josh, you know far more about this than I do. I'm going to turn this over to you to walk us through our options.
Sure. Maybe I'll give a bit of an overview. We do have Gail Lafond from Acroshore. The town has contracted with Hickok and Boardman for the last number of years to help us out with health insurance and the
Starting the healthcare discussion.
and the complexities of healthcare. And they've been acquired by Acroshore, so we have Gail Lafond here tonight with us for the discussion on health insurance. But let me just basically give a quick overview of the town's plans, and then Gail, I'm sure we'll be able to jump in if there's more specific questions on any of these plans. So currently the town offers health insurance through MVP. The town pays 90% of the premium for the platinum plan, and the employee pays 10% of that premium. The MVP premium costs have risen by 10%, but premiums are still lower than premiums for Blue Cross Blue Shield, which would be our other option. And years ago, we switched from Blue Cross Blue Shield to MVP for some savings, and MVP has continued to be below Blue Cross Blue Shield. We also offer 2 high deductible healthcare plans, Gold and Silver. Those premiums are a bit less than the Platinum plan, so the town pays 100% of that premium, and then the difference of that premium and 90% of the Platinum premium goes into a employee health savings account for each employee that elects to be on the Gold and Silver high deductible. So essentially, the town pays 90% of the Platinum premium for every employee, but it gives the employee some choice as far as which healthcare plan will fit their needs better. MVP Gold premiums increased by 11%. Blue Cross Blue Shield, similar plan, increased by 21%. Last year, MVP premiums were higher than Blue Cross Blue Shield, but with a 21% increase in Blue Cross Blue Shield, MVP is now less. MVP Silver premiums increased by 12% and are lower still than the premiums of a comparable Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. So my recommendation is we sort of, I think, stick with the same offering for health insurance. It seems to have been working rather well for the employees. And I don't see any great amount of savings by switching around too much to anything else, like we did a couple of years ago where we switched from Blue Cross Blue Shield to MVP. Gail or Connie, anything that you'd like to add before we turn it over for questions or comments?
No, I don't know if we're going to have Gail walk us through anything.
I'm happy to walk you through everything. That was a great summary. Thank you very much. The only thing I guess the biggest thing that I would point out, there were very minor changes in the actual plans themselves. But in reality, the overall deductibles for both of or all 3 of the plans that you were looking to offer, none of those deductibles or out-of-pocket maximums have changed. With the exception of prescription drug coverage went up just slightly. Their out-of-pocket changed a little bit. but the overall medical plan deductibles did not change. So minor impact from a plan design, and certainly the less expensive option in comparison to the Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Bart?
And I don't know if this is an apropos question or not, but do you know if there were changes in their prescription medication formularies, like what they cover,
Right, good question.
what they don't cover?
That will, those will change every year, and they typically change January 1st, and occasionally there are some also that change around July 1st. It tends to be about a twice a year scenario when that happens. It's not a massive change. There are a handful of prescription drugs that will change. They will go from, say, a tier 3 down to a tier 2 or vice versa. Anybody who is on a particular medication already and is impacted by a change like this will receive a letter directly from MVP months in advance of that change, notifying them of how that change impacts them, whether it's going from one tier to another or it's not a covered drug. We see less of them removing a drug completely. However, if a drug is removed completely and the member has reached out to their physician, they can actually speak with them about whether or not they can submit for a request to have an approval for that drug still to be covered. Because if they've already gone through all the other options and none of them have worked, and that's the only drug that is successfully helping them to be healthy, then an exception can be made in that situation.
Okay.
Quick question. I don't know why I didn't ask this in prior years. Are any of these plans considered narrow network, or are these all broad network?
So these, the MVP network is, the MVP in network is in itself considered a regional. So that would be Vermont and New York. If you are outside of Vermont and New York, they do partner with the Cigna network so that you do have national coverage when you need it. There is not out of network coverage. There is only in network coverage. But again, as long as you're Vermont and New York with MVP and outside of that regional area, use Cigna, you are in network.
Okay. The reason I ask is because I'm somebody who gets his insurance through his employer, and I elected a plan that is considered a narrow network. I'm rolling the dice that any provider I may want to see may or may not be in the network, but my premiums are
Considerably lower.
are lower as a result. And I've been lucky so far. No provider I've wanted to see has not been in the network, but that's another way to make for a lower premium. I didn't know if that was one of the offerings that you've ever had.
The Vermont Health Connect products, with Vermont just in general being relatively a small state in itself, Blue Cross and MVP do not have separate networks like that. They are just one whole network.
Okay, so that moots the question. Okay. And thank you for clarifying that there is no out-of-network coverage. But that the Cigna network is there, and so it's unlikely somebody would be left in a position of having no one they could see.
That is correct. And it would be no different if you were on the Blue Cross side, also same thing. Blue Cross is the same way. It's only in network coverage. They just have a national Blue Cross network. So wherever you are, as long as you're using Blue Cross, you'd be covered. So similar thing, they're just partnering with Cigna on a national level for MVP.
And looking at the types of care, can you give us any background on which of the types of care would require pre-authorization? Would seeing a specialist require pre-authorization, or is that on a type-by-type basis, or what?
So it's not necessarily seeing the specialist per se. It is about procedures that may require having a pre-approval or a prior approval for certain types of procedures or surgeries. And so within the state of Vermont, effective 1/1/25, you may have been hearing this in the news. If someone is seeking certain types of care or diagnostic testing, there used to be prior authorizations, but if it is ordered by your primary care provider, you may not need that. For example, an MRI and other, there's a very specific list. So that has been removed from a primary care provider ordering those tests.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Jack?
I'm thinking.
Jack, we can't hear you. You have to come up.
Thank you. I think insurance is vital. I mean, that's how you keep good employees.
Mhm.
So what if an employee is covered by spouse's insurance?
We have an opt-out for that employee, so if they're a single employee, they get an additional $2,500. If they're a single employee with no spouse or children, they get an additional $2,500 per year. And if they have a spouse or children, they get an additional $5,000 per year as an opt-out payment to them.
Oh, my goodness.
Works out well for us, though.
Oh, it does, okay.
Yeah, when you consider the premiums, I think,
Mhm.
what's the family? It's up near $30,000 now, Gail.
Yeah, so if you have someone enrolled, yeah, you think about it, it is going to be $2,300 just on the silver. It's $3,380 for a family on the platinum plan. That's $40,560 total. Take off 10% that the employee pays. So that's significant. So 5,000 is a savings.
Because insurance is part of the overall compensation and salary benefits.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And we do value our employees and we do want to be competitive, but we don't want to give away the store either.
Right. So then the second question is the number of staff. If I looked at the percentage increase in staff for the town of Richmond in the last 5 years or 10 years, and looked at the percentage of increase in the residents of the town, I think we've gone way overboard on staff versus the percentage, because we're not much more than we're here as residents when I moved here in 1978. Not much more. But the staff has increased in the last 5 years. I think it's gone out of sight.
Can you give an
And
example?
I don't
of
know
staff?
why.
Can you give an example, Jack, of staff that you don't think we need? Because when I'm thinking of the staffing, we have police, we have highway, we definitely need a highway
Police,
people.
highway.
We have a
I'm
zoning
thinking in the
administrator.
Staff right in here.
Okay.
We now have a zoning administrator, one.
Mhm.
You have 2 assistants. We have a planner,
Mhm.
which we didn't have 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And that's,
He did.
years and years ago, I had worked with the government.
Mhm.
And the saying then was, once an employee has 8 hours of work a day, he needs help. And that was, and that was 50 years ago. And so that's a concern of mine, that's all.
Good.
I don't know how many is excess, but the same, what do you call it, water and sewer plant was run by one person when I moved here.
Bart?
It's an interesting discussion. I'll say, if you did not take a tour of the water sewer or the wastewater treatment plant like 2 or 3 years ago, you missed an opportunity. Here's an example of what we got with thin staffing. There were 2 parallel designs, 2 parallel treatment lines in that plant. One of
There's always been, right?
Oh,
yeah, since its design.
Okay.
One of those lines has not worked in what, 20 years?
Right.
Yeah.
Because, it's difficult to get parts, it's too much work, I guess, too expensive. There were broken parts, like it was sort of like your grandfather's attic after a lifetime of collecting broken stuff and sticking it on shelves. I mean, so part of it is you get what you pay for, I suppose. but it's still a reasonable question. How many do we need? I think there has been an ongoing tension about the complexity of municipal, county, and state government around the country. There's more regulation, more expectations, and it's more complicated. I mean, it was not that long ago when at some point we had just a select board. We didn't have a town manager or a town administrator. I will only say I would never be on the select board without a town manager or town administrator. As an example.
The water didn't even want to bring up because it's an older plant.
Right. I want to validate something, Jack, that you said though, because you're not wrong in certain respects. If you look at higher education funding at the college level, colleges have their tuition is exponentially increased over what I was paying when I was a student, but the number of teachers is the same. It's there's a vice president it's the overhead of the vice presidents and the administrators. You've got 10 times as many administrators, but you've got the same number of teachers.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I assume that you're getting a lot more pay, aren't you?
And having
We haven't voted on it.
having gone to college when there was a cinder block dorm and bad food, now you have nice dorms, fitness centers, and food courts.
Yeah.
Right.
Like it's a hotel that many students can't aspire to live in after they graduate.
And I guess just on the staffing for the town, I think that there's been a few things that have been sort of natural disaster related that have increased the work. We have with the two floods, we have 2 FEMA claims that have increased a ton of administrative work. We've got emergency watershed protection programs that we're working on where we have to hire engineers and contractors for flood mitigation. We're working on a flood mitigation grant. We're working on home elevations and buyouts. That's just related to the flooding. COVID created ARPA money, which created another committee to manage what the ARPA money is going to be spent on. Now those projects are flowing to town staff to work on permitting and getting contractors hired and execution of those projects to get those in place. Looking at planning, Keith could stay busy just focusing on helping the planning commission rewrite zoning. And there's always a lot going on there, but then he's got housing committee, transportation committee, parking committee that are all fairly new committees that are all looking to him for guidance. There's always an increase in grants and road projects that, yes, Pete's managing a lot of those, but there's also a lot of administrative work that goes into that. And every grant that comes in puts more administrative work in, and as far as reporting back to federal agencies and state agencies with the grant work and tracking expenses. So I don't know that you can directly correlate the amount of work to the number of people in town, but I feel like there is a good amount of work that continues to increase, and we keep getting new demands for, let's do a traffic study here, let's work on this over here. There's a lot to try to tackle.
I think the more committees you have, more work is required.
And
I
well,
agree with that.
Okay.
But we can discuss this when we get to the relevant portions of the budget. This is about health insurance. I know that Gail is sitting there very patiently waiting to see if any more questions come her way. Gail, I would just like to say to the town and to Gail that I think Hickok and Boardman, or Acrisure, as they're now a subsidiary of, has been very good to work with for several years. I had occasion to call Hickok and Boardman today about my own personal policies, and I was just amazed by how quickly and easily my problem was solved, how informed the person I spoke to was. You don't get that with just every insurance firm. It's a good bunch of people to work with, and I'm glad that they're our insurance broker.
I've been with Hickok and Boardman for 30 years.
Thank you.
Well, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I will share that with our team here. So thank you.
Do we have any more questions or comments related to town employee health insurance? Are we ready for a motion?
I believe so.
Page 2, line 51.
I thought you'd like to make motions. Oh, you don't have a copy?
No, the computer.
Mr. Chairman, I move to offer MVP Platinum Plan with 90% of the premiums paid by the town and 10% paid by the employee, and to also offer the MVP Gold 3 and Silver 2 high deductible healthcare plans, with the town paying 100% of the deductible and contributing to a health savings account in an amount equal to the difference between 90% of the platinum premium and the full amount of gold 3 or silver 2.
Thank you, Jay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Lisa. Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Lisa, aye.
Bart, aye.
J.I.
David, aye.
And
Adam, aye.
there we go.
Thank you, Adam. Motion carries.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you all. I appreciate the time. Connie, I will check back with you this week.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Gail. You don't have to leave. You're more than welcome to stay.
I actually have more work to do. It is that season for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that takes care of item A. Item B, review of the draft fiscal year 2026 budget.
Yay.
So this is the meat of why we're here.
You'd like me to give a
I
sort of
do.
brief overview before we get into each individual department. So as you see, we have it lined up with each individual department having time for discussion. I've asked each department head to be here. Hopefully they're all able to make it. If not, I think Connie and I are pretty well versed in most departments and we can help walk through those. So I want to remind everybody, select board and those listening, that this is a first pass at the FY26 budget. Department heads were asked to provide figures for their budget based on what they feel they need in FY26. For some departments, this did include an increase in staffing, and we've made notes on those changes in for the rest of the meeting. I do want to make a few notes on what we do not have for this meeting. We do not have final financials for FY24 or the draft audit for FY24, which means that we do not have the FY24 unassigned and restricted funds. We are also working on a sheet which details the total costs submitted to FEMA for the 2023 storm, reimbursements received to date, and reimbursements we expect to receive. And we're working on finalizing the total costs from the 2024 flooding. All of this will be important to understand how much money we might or might not have to put towards the budget. In the last few budgets, we've put a significant amount of unassigned and restricted funds towards the budget to offset the tax rate. That's essentially budget surplus that we had underspent the budget lines or overspent, or sorry, increased revenue that we did not budget for. And we were able to put that towards the budget to decrease the tax rate. For instance, last year we put $433,000 towards the budget to reduce the amount we had to raise in taxes. So we will have that information by the November meeting, but I just want to keep that in mind that we really can't talk about how much we can put towards the budget right now. So that's sort of my general overview and sort of warning of what we can and can't do tonight based on the information that we have and what we'll do in November. Bart, did you want to talk about CPI?
I didn't do a whole lot of research. We were just starting to look at it, and I know it has changed. Like when we looked at it a few months ago, it was higher than it is now. So I think we want to get the most current and maybe even, not sure when we actually need to apply that number. It might be the October number that's available in November. Because the one for September is what, 3.4?
Was looking on my phone. I just want to verify it by looking at an actual website. It's obviously by region. We're in the Northeast region, so going to September, yes, 3.4.
And maybe that's a starting number or percentage, and then there are times that we hit it or fail to hit it, but we might look again as we move forward to say, has it changed? I
If you
think
like.
Social Security is like 2.5% next year, less than it.
Josh, if you're going to click the link I just shared, you'll see what I was talking about.
Yeah, there's one that I go to for the, oh yeah, this is the same one here.
And you can see the graph down there talking about
Yeah.
what Bart is saying.
Okay, yeah, and then usually there's a PDF that you can click into, which is where I go to for when we're talking about wages in the springtime. Does this have the number you're looking at? Do I have the right part of the page called up, Jay?
Yeah, at the start of the
Oh.
second paragraph, there's a 3.4. Yeah, actually right there too.
Yeah. Okay,
So maybe that's a stake in the ground for today and
Mhm.
subject to revision.
Yeah.
But again, it's a target, not an absolute.
right, something to keep in mind, for sure. Oh, I didn't even share my screen on this one, sorry. Oh no, this is on the, All right.
Connie raised her hand.
Go ahead, Connie.
So to be clear, are you asking me to rework all the payroll numbers based on 3.4%? It's an intense amount of work to constantly
So,
No.
be
no, I think
changing it.
that's the target tax increase.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
and I guess just
I
to
thought
get
we
to
were back on the
no.
payroll CPI.
So a couple, I brought up the payroll CPI because I have a very specific report that I have a link and a pathway to that I use in June for that. So maybe just a couple other notes on sort of general things that we applied to this budget. We assumed all salaries will be on the pay grid, with the pay grid going up 3% and everybody going up 2% on the grid. And all the benefits tied to salary, VEMR's, Social Security, and disability and insurance have also been calculated based on the adjusted salaries. Health insurance for non-union employees were calculated with the town paying the equivalent of 90% of the premiums for platinum health insurance. Actually, and police has gone up 2%. Their grade went up 2% based on their CPI. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. Health insurance opt-outs are calculated at $2,500 for a single person, $5,000 for employees with dependents. Passive insurance lines are budgeted the same as FY24. We'll know more about our passive insurance numbers. That's property casualty insurance for the town and workers' comp. We'll know more about that in the next couple of months. And cells that are budgeted in yellow are items that we'll be getting more information on prior to finalizing the budget. For now, these lines are either kept flat or estimated, but most likely they will increase because there's certain things that, you know, like passive health or like passive insurance that we know an increase will be coming. We just don't know how much, but we will know by the final budget meeting in December.
Are we ready to jump into department heads? Okay,
So,
we have library first. Are you ready to go?
Yeah. So,
Okay. Welcome.
welcome. So,
Josh, can you pull up the spreadsheet?
oh, yeah.
um, still there? Oh dear.
Yeah, we're still
We're
here.
here.
Go ahead. Josh is
Okay.
just picking up the master's
screen.
spreadsheet.
Okay. Can you hear us, Rebecca?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So, there will be a significant change to, I mean, this reflects the changes. My salary, and I've been at the maximum of the grid. I won't be on the grid anymore for the rest of fiscal 2025. We have selected a replacement, and she is taking over very soon. And one of the things that we want to do within the savings, as a matter of fact, the total number for salaries is less than if I were to stay. So we actually need some more help at the library, and not a librarian. We need like a page or a clerk, an assistant one. We have just a ton of traffic. I think that's great. We've really become a happening place, but we actually can't keep up with the physical load of the traffic, the circulation, the shelving, the book processing, and the book repairs. So that is a hope that we can hire a 12 to 15 hour person. And, you know, one of the reasons that has happened is I learned recently that Richmond has the highest circulation per capita in the state. And we also have the highest visits in the state per capita. So for our town our size, we blow everybody else away, which is a good thing, but it also does mean more work. And so we need a little bit of help. It is not something that volunteers can do, and more, there's less that volunteers can do for a variety of reasons. One, they don't come on a regular basis. They don't have the skill sets to work with the computers. They don't understand the digital world at all, except for maybe one person. So we need somebody that has some continuity. And also, we would prefer to have a clerk who can staff rather than on the days that we only have 2 people. If somebody is sick, it is near impossible to find a sub. So we really kind of do need that that backup person who, it's not great to work with just 2 people at a time now, but it can be done in cases of illness or unexpected absence. So that's what we're incorporating in the salaries. And then, of course, Connie has worked out all the associated expenses with benefits and Social Security and so on. We're asking for a $250 increase to our office supplies and a $500 increase to our postage because postage keeps going up, including our post office box. We're asking for a $1,000 increase to our computer line. Since we have been part of the town's email, I was a little bit surprised when I first saw the invoice for the emails. It comes to about $1,000 a year that we never used to pay before when we were GMAVT. So that is supposed to incorporate file storage and support. I guess all we really right now have been using it for is email. It does have a version of Microsoft Office, and we're using that. But that's what it ends up costing with the simple route is over $1,000 a year. No change to the book line. We've moved the public use funds into a budget line, and we are making deposits when people pay for copies or faxes. So we're taking that over to Linda, and that is being recorded. We're asking for $300 increase to programs because, well, people who are guests and do our programs, they're also asking for a little bit more money than they used to 5 years ago. So not change to telephone. We're reducing the heat based upon past year experience. Electricity, I think a slight increase. We were over a little bit, and so it was 5,600 last year, so we're asking for 6,000 just to be on the safe side. And Connie has said she'll be reflecting the EV charges and the revenue on a quarterly basis, right, Connie? So, rather than, oh my gosh, we're $3,000 over budget, which was not the case. That was actually the EV usage. A reduction in water and sewer, no change to maintenance, and a request for an increase to the library reserve of 3,000 instead of 3,000 over 12,000 for a total of 15,000. So that is the library budget in a nutshell.
Okay.
Couple points I want to speak to. One, regarding the page. I've worked at 3 different libraries, at a public library, university library, and a special collections library. And she is absolutely correct. You cannot run a library hoping volunteers will show up. There's too much work to be done and you cannot just say, well, I hope that Billy comes in. He missed his last 2 volunteer slots. A page at this point to do the kind of work that Rebecca discussed is essential. I also want to comment that this increase in traffic, I told you that if we put in the dance floor and the disco ball, this was going to happen. So, it is what it is. But Rebecca, I think that stuff about the greatest circulation, greatest visits in the state is something that deserves sharing. I don't know if you've already shared that to Front Porch Forum, but I think it'd be worth doing so.
Okay.
Because that's something to be proud of, that you're offering such a quality library experience, if you will, that with the meager resources you've got, you're still somehow managing to bring the people in.
Well, I think we might even beat our last year's record too. After this summer, the youth, Wendy and Suzanne have done a fabulous amount of work. Telescope programs, the eclipse, scavenger hunts, and they've done a great job. There's been great adult programming. So I think we're even going to beat our record. I actually did, it wasn't true to the fiscal 23 report, but I did put it in the town report, and I have a feeling I'll be putting it in again.
Any other questions for Rebecca?
Not today.
Any comments?
Thank you.
Rebecca, how much did you, I know the book sale's coming up. How much did you bring? Does the money from the book sale go directly into the library budget, or is it, what is that used for?
So it does not go into the library budget. It is under the control of the Friends group.
The
And
Friends,
we place requests with the Friends, asking them to subsidize expensive things. So they actually fund the entire summer program, which is our busiest programming season. So, you know, they pay for the magician, they pay for the wildlife, they paid for the Siberian husky visit, the artwork, and all of the things, the prizes. So they pay for all of that. And the other programming is adult programming and materials. So, but we do, I mean, they've also have underwritten the Hoopla service, which is digital downloads. And they have given us $3,000 to be able to offer that, and another $1,500 so that we can offer more audiobooks on a program called Overdrive Advantage. And those titles are only for Richmond patrons. We're a member of a group consortium, and the collection is an aggregate that's shared among 60 different libraries. And of course, if you have a hot title, it means that you have people waiting for, you know, a limited number of copies. So with the Advantage program, we can get the license for something that's just for Richmond patrons, so they don't have to wait in the queue so long. And the Friends paid for that too.
Art?
You know, I realize this is a really such a small detail, but I'm looking at revenues. Is that something that does or should show up in revenues on the chart of accounts?
I was just making a note of the same thing, Bart, but I believe I've asked the auditors before and they have said no. Both the expense and the revenue runs through the Friends.
Well, if they pay for it, it would seem that's true, but if they literally give the money to the library and the library spends it.
No, they pay the bill. They pay the bill.
Okay. All right, never mind. So when you say give it to them, they give it to you. They don't
Yeah,
give you the
no,
money,
we don't see it. We hand an invoice to one of the Friends officers, and we have a meeting at least twice a year where we say, we would really like to have this, but would be a real drain on our book budget, or it would be a real drain on our program budget. Can you give us this gift? And that's what they do. So I just forward the invoices and they send a check.
Mr. Chairman, I just would like to say that I think everything the library is asking for is entirely appropriate. And I just wish we could give them more, but unfortunately, the accounts are not bottomless.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Are we ready to move on to fire department?
Yes.
Come on down. Or actually, you can stay there if you wanted. This mic's right there.
Okay.
Oh, salaries go up to $70,000 this year for next year. And fire calls.
It actually is better if they come up to the microphone if they don't mind.
Sorry, guys, you lost your seat.
Yeah.
And actually, could you slide the microphone to the middle of the table when you come up?
One other than that.
Gonna cost her.
Thanks.
Okay, we increased the salaries up to $70,000 for next year. Cause we've been averaging well over 200 and we had for the last 3 years, we averaged 210 calls. And this year we're up to 190 already and we got 2.5 more months left to go. So we're gonna be way over the salary. And training we left the same, telephone, cell phone same. Awards at the banquet. We've been paying for the banquet and awards and pins and coats and shirts and things like that. The money we've been using from coin drops and stuff. But we kind of like this because it's getting short of help of people doing volunteering to do with the coin drops and everything.
How did the coin drop this past weekend do?
About 3,200.
Okay.
And I see public relations, you raised that 300. Cost of things are going up and we're giving out more material and stuff for kids and education. And the heat, we dropped it 1,000. We hope the difference is going to make with the heat pump we got up there now. We just had installed. Because we only heat one room now instead of the whole station. Let's see, water and sewer, that stayed the same. Just about everything down through all that staying just about the same.
Now with the heat pump, has your electricity line gone up enough to anticipate the extra electricity for the heat pump?
I believe so.
Okay.
It's nice to have AC in there now.
Yep.
I'm not sure about what it costs to run the heat pump per day, but. Oh, gas and oil and diesel, that's all set. Pump testing, that's a yearly thing. That's average about 1,500. Let's see what else we got here. Fleet maintenance, we raised that up to 15, we raised it $5,000. Because our roaster truck, not the new one, the old one, is starting to show its age and starting to put a little more money into it. Hope we don't have to put much more, but post testing, that's a yearly thing. Equipment repair, that's for, oh, let's see, that stays the same 3,000. That's like portable radio, not radios, I mean like CO meters and thermal cameras and things like that. And supplies, we left that the same. Oh, supply, yeah. Okay, equipment purchase. And Connie can explain that, and they dropped it $10,000, and I think part of it's going into capital reserves, is it?
Well, I think
Right,
part of it-
so initially Dennis had said to put $40,000. He was thinking that we'd need $40,000 worth of equipment to add to the new rescue truck we're getting, but we are not getting the rescue truck until fiscal year 27. And this type of equipment would come out of the capital reserves. That's already been factored into that. So we were able to bring that back down to 25,000.
And as far as interest and all that principal on the fire trucks, that's all. I don't keep track of that. Connie keeps track of that. And safety equipment and bunker gear reserve. That's for air packs and bunker gear. But we've been told, Jerry and I went to a open house thing at Reynolds Equipment a day in Barry. And we talked to one guy from I think it was Global, one of them about fire gear. And they're saying that by next year, So it's probably the prices are going up between 30 and 35%. And that's the other thing we're finding out, that nozzles and whatever other stuff we need, the prices are going up. I just ordered one valve to go on one of the trucks. I ordered it about 3 months ago, and hopefully I'm going to get it this month. Because they just can't get the material, get the stuff.
Wow.
We're not the only one. Wilson had the same problem. They got a new truck and they couldn't even get nozzles for it, for their hose lines.
Wow.
And we are finding a difference, and we are going out to different vendors for hoses, and I went to one vendor for some large diameter hose. One vendor was about between $400 and $500 cheaper than the other one,
Wow.
so.
Well, all the
Doing what we
nozzles
can
on my
today.
1953 fire truck are still working great. Now you have security cameras at the fire station
Yes,
now, right?
yes.
Okay. And are you worried there might be some unforeseen costs with the new bridge and the reconstruction and the reconfiguring that we might be aware of?
I think everything's gonna work out pretty good. I think the Route 2 is gonna be a little closer to
Yeah,
the station, but
and your driveway's not this anymore, now it's
it's gonna
this.
be very level. And they've been excellent to work with.
Nice.
I do worry that people coming down the ramp there, coming over the bridge, it's dropping them off, they're coming right by the entrance to the fire station. I hope they're paying attention.
Yeah, hopefully we can get the state to put some more signage up since, Route 2.
Art,
Or depending on what your experience and, advice is, you might suggest some kind of lighting system, flashing lights, something that gets
Yeah.
more attention than just the trucks themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty common thing. I think, at least in a more urban setting
Yeah,
where,
when lit truck is backing out or.
yeah. So maybe just something to think about if that's something we need to do.
We're gonna have a better line of sight now coming from Jonesville to Richmond, because it's all that's up higher and we can see them now, and they can see us better than what we could before.
Yeah.
It's actually improved conditions.
Yeah.
Jack,
I think Williston fire trucks can control the traffic light there too.
they can.
Yeah. We're, I've been working on that. And another fireman is supposed to get hold of a gentleman that knows all about them. We'll just have to buy a little strobe light and it should change the lights here at the Four Corners.
So this one is controllable now.
That's what I'm hearing, yes.
That's what we were told.
Yeah,
I think the one down parking right is too, I believe.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be.
Supposed to be.
We just have to get the right frequency of light
Mm.
to make a
Make it work.
change.
And don't let everybody else in town know that frequency.
Correct.
Except for me.
Because you have a fire truck. So I have
police car.
two sort of related questions to staff and salaries. One, because I live in town and it seems like I hear a lot more sirens from the fire station than I used to hear. So I don't know, that's just a subjective impression, but your data suggests it's true. My follow-up question to that specifically is, if you have any sense, is it every kind of call or a specific kind of call? Like, why are we having more calls, if you have a sense?
It's everything.
Just everything, bigger volume of everything.
Right.
A second thing that I think it would be worth reminding people is how we pay the volunteers, what the current rate of pay is and how that works. Because obviously, we're not paying people to not go on calls, and so this is directly related to that. But maybe explain that briefly, just so people know.
But one thing's been working out good. We're automatic dispatch for Bolton, and Bolton's automatic dispatch to Richmond. So if we get a call, Bolton automatically comes in. If Bolton gets a call, we automatically go there. And it's been working good. The other day, Jerry and I went to a car accident in Kenyon Road.
I heard about that.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry and I are the only ones who showed up.
I showed up.
Yeah.
With your fire truck?
No.
You're a volunteer, you're looking for more help. Just as I say, the 5 guys that show up, I call them the senior citizen club, because we're all over 65.
So-
It's hard to get people to show up and to volunteer.
Yes, it
So
is.
to answer your question maybe about the pay, so But I think, Connie, the firefighters are at what, $1.15 or so above minimum wage?
Yeah. something like that.
And then there's like an extra 50 cents or $1 for a captain, an extra 50 cents or $1 for assistant chief, and then up to chief. The firefighters are paid $2 minimum for each call that they go on. So if it's longer than 2 hours, they get paid for more than 2 hours. We have at least 2 hours for the call out pay. And then they're also paid for what, trainings?
Trainings, they get 2 hours.
And then, but not the meeting. So there's
And the
meetings.
business meeting, they do truck checks on the
the
business
truck check,
meeting.
yes,
We
we-
pay them
yeah.
for 1 hour.
So that's when the firefighters are paid. They're basically paid when they show up, and some guys showed every call, some guys showed up one a month.
So the trend I'm hearing is fire departments are getting called out more frequently, but very few structure fires. Is that
Correct.
true in Richmond as well?
We should get to work on that.
Yes. So back when you were a youngster, on average structure fire, you could survive anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes. But with new synthetics and everything, you're talking 4 to 6 minutes. So it's just, everything's changed in the world, that too much cyanide gases from everything.
So the structure fires actually burn faster.
It's
of the
burn
gases.
hotter and give off more toxic gases.
But they happen less frequently.
No, a lot of that's because of the construction of sheetrock now will last a lot longer than the old days.
The other good thing we got now too is with Williston. They listen to our calls and everything else. If they hear that we got a structure fire, they automatically come. And they can, because they're full time. And they have no problem coming, because we had that fire over Millet Street. And matter of fact, they got here, I think, just before we did.
Yeah, they pulled the first line in the building.
I will note that you start to appreciate how close they actually are. They're not very far away. I would assume also that smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors have had some preventive effect.
Yep.
Things that didn't exist 50 or 60 years ago.
Well,
Yeah.
all new construction after 1986 requires carbon monoxide and smoke detector. Which has helped.
Also, any building sold has to have them.
And unfortunately, we can't make people change the batteries.
Nope.
I don't understand that.
Oh, we'll get a call once in a while, the fire alarm, the beep, and like, well, it's been beeping for the last 8 hours, and get sick of it, the whole fire department. Come to find out, batteries need changing and.
Maybe we should post that to Front Shore Forum. If your fire detector is going beep, beep,
But we don't want to bother the fire department, they say.
Jack?
I have a question. Is the percentage of calls that you have to go out onto the highway, onto the interstate, is that significant or is that just minimal?
I'd say we're talking 40 to 60%.
Is that right?
Is that weather dependent or is that just,
Yes and no.
I'd say it's stupidity.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll just say you get your Friday night and Saturday night people. Yeah, so.
yeah.
The
Any
only
further
other thing we
questions?
might in the next year or two is, I'd like to probably get a guy to do maintenance and on the trucks and whatever, if we can. I don't know, full-time, part-time. I know the highway department, they, I know they're tied up, but they do a little changes in state inspections, but they got other things that need to be done up there that some of the guys just don't want to do.
Bart, so maybe that's a topic for us to put in the parking lot also, because that might be cross-department. You
Yeah.
know, the water sewer department has a couple of vehicles too, so easier to maintain than the big ones, but that might be something to contemplate. I'm also informed here by a conversation and meeting just before this one with the Regional Planning Commission and Clayton Clark from Green Mountain Transit. They have a big budget problem, but one of the things they described is the increasing difficulty getting diesel mechanics, and they've had to raise diesel mechanic wages and benefits substantially over the last few years.
Yeah.
To recruit and retain folks. I forget how many buses they have. They have a I think 5 to 8 electric buses.
Yeah.
Then a whole bunch of diesel buses, and they're talking about some propane buses,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it makes it a somewhat complicated fleet to maintain,
Right.
but that's been one of their challenges, to have the mechanics. I think 3 of their 5 electric buses are currently out of service.
Any other questions or comments for the fire department?
I would just like to thank the fire department for, with the limited number of people who actually show up for calls,
Yeah.
of still coming through rain, slow, or snow, sleet, dark day,
Flood.
flood,
I say Jerry and I are not gonna be around forever.
right?
We hope so.
Clearly, we need to do something to get people to, A, volunteer, but B, be prepared to respond to calls. If somebody works in Burlington, they're not gonna be there if
Yeah.
there's a call at 2 PM on a weekday afternoon.
It's nothing like it used to be. An employer, if they want a fire call, the employer would pay them, and
Mhm.
they don't do that anymore.
So it does strike me that's something, I understand Heinsberg recently hired a salaried chief.
Yeah,
And I've heard this story around the state, that people are wrestling with what's the right mix, not only today, but 5 or 10 years from now. How do we poise ourselves to have a viable fire department? And what some of them clearly are doing is moving towards more paid staff, right?
So Heinsberg actually has a paid chief now, salary chief, plus 3 members.
they're full time.
So during the week, they have at least 3 people on per shift, during the day only, 40 hours. So, but some work 10-hour days, so it's like Monday through Friday, they at least have 3 people on.
And that may be inevitable if something doesn't turn around.
Yeah.
As just a random digression, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns agreed to include in its legislative priorities for next year, allowing municipalities to offer firefighters who respond to X number of calls a tax break. That's legal in New York. It's not legal here. But if you knew that by responding to calls, you get 10% off your property taxes, that could be a game changer. But the VLCT pushing for it doesn't mean that they're going to pass it. It just means that somebody's going to hopefully be pushing for it.
But the other thing too, OSHA's pushing this thing for all new requirements for firemen. And if that passes, if they do it in NFPA, it's gonna cost a whole heck of a lot more money. Cause you're gonna have the guy come in, check the brakes and stuff on the trucks. I think it's every 3 months. And you gotta be certified in that, and you gotta be certified in different things too, and bunker gear, and the guys are gonna have to take physicals twice a year, sometimes 4 times a year if you wear air packs. So doesn't look good.
Another unfunded mandate.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a topic to put in the parking lot for next year, moving forward, if we think years down the road, and 5 years has a way of coming faster than we think. To be thinking ahead, what does the future look like in terms of support for the fire department and staff?
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Well, thank you for the goodies, whoever made them.
Take some with you.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to planning and zoning?
Is Keith?
Keith, I'm not sure if he is here.
I don't see him. I haven't
No,
seen
I
him.
don't see him.
That was quick.
Well,
Well, I have one topic, one comment here. I left the Regional Planning Commission meeting early, but one could anticipate a 2.5% increase in municipal dues for CCRPC. I don't know if that's reflected here in a.
yeah, we have a slight increase from 63.35 to 67.50. Connie, did we just make an estimate on that? We didn't get the bill yet from them, I don't think.
That's where Keith told me to plug it at, but it's possible that they'll get a confirmation as the budget goes on.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was being voted on tonight. It doesn't really make a difference, but we should know we should get some sort of notice within the next week or 2 of what the actual municipal dues are.
Okay. So yeah, not too much changes to anything other than staffing, and that's really just salary increases associated, healthcare increases and benefits that are tied to salary, or expenses tied to salary. Other than that, there's really no major jumps in any of the other budget lines. So it could be quick.
So to Jack's point, there are no more salaried hours. It's just the cost per hour is going up because of increases.
Right, so like the wage rate increase, just going up a step, it's still just Keith and Tyler. And then their associated health insurance, contributions to VEMR's, Social Security, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
On a vaguely related note, I noticed that Ravi is now planning director for City of Winooski.
Okay.
Winooski, okay.
I knew he was looking, I didn't know he actually got the job.
Yeah, you got the
Thought maybe I heard that, but yeah.
Ravi, if you're listening, if you want less benefits and lower pay, you're welcome to come back to Richmond.
What a great ad for the town of Richmond. But we, no, I think doing really good with Keith and Tyler right now, so. So unless there's any, I don't think there's too much change on that budget.
Are we ready to move on to police?
Sure.
Yes.
And then I don't know if, again, I don't know if every department could make it today. I don't see,
I didn't see anybody.
Cambridge. but let's see, we can give a bit of a. What are my police notes? Okay. And so last year, as you recall, we ended up having about 3 different ways to fund the police department, because the police department, we were sort of a bit in flux. So this year, what we did was we estimated staffing at 1 sergeant, 1 corporal, and 2 officers, and a contracted police chief, which is the current situation. We do have 1 corporal hired. We still have open for a sergeant and 2 officer position. We did add an administrative assistant at 40 hours plus benefits. We have not started to really rehire for Diane leaving. I know that I did talk with Todd over at Heinsberg about possibly sharing that. So I need to continue to close that loop with him about how much money they might have to share on that. Because part of the reason for going to 40 hours was to try to share with Heinsberg. So we don't have an offsetting revenue on that yet. But I think some more conversations with Heinsberg, hopefully we can figure something out there. Part of that reason being that I think Diane was budgeted for about 15 hours a week here. I think the admin work in general is increasing in police like it is everywhere. And then currently there's no admin staffing, I don't believe, in Heinsberg. You're even really budgeted. So if we can come to a deal with them to split an admin, similar way we're splitting a chief, it could be helpful for both departments.
Art?
It strikes me, this is a somewhat unique department, given our history and current state. And it seems to me that it may be prudent to meet with Heinsberg on a couple of key things here about sharing officers. If we are engaged in, we've gone from short-term to medium-term and headed towards perhaps long-term relationship. What does it look like for budgeting for a chief across 2 towns, for officers across 2 towns? And my key question here, and we can't really engage in this conversation without Chief Cambridge, is how many officers would we want or need if we look at the 2 towns as conjoined,
right?
As opposed to 2 separate things and then we spill over? To think of it coherently as shared and crossover policing. And I'm not sure that we have I know what the right number is. I'm not sure this is the right number. Is it 4 and a chief? Is it something other than that and an admin person? And then related to that, of course, is cruisers, because with the officers comes how many cruisers do we want based on circumstances and need as well?
Yeah, so the number I've heard Chief Cambridge talk about is, if both departments are fully staffed with 5 officers in Heinsberg and 4 officers in Richmond, he feels that 9 would be a really comfortable number to patrol both towns with, if you could have sort of seamless integration between both towns. Is sort of what I've heard him say most recently. As far as cruisers, right now we are budgeting to have 4 police cruisers because we have 4 officers, and the agreement right now with the union is for a take-home cruiser. If that were to change in the future, then I think we'd have to revisit how many cruisers do you need between both towns, maybe, if you have a staff of 9, or if we have a staff of 4 in Richmond, how many cruisers do we need for Richmond officers and a chief if there's no tankers?
It just strikes me that we should have the chief here to have this conversation. Why 9? What does it actually mean in terms of day and hour shift coverage? I mean, how many are covering right now today across 2 towns?
I think they have 5 and we have 6.
Well, 6.5.
6.5, 6.5. 6.5.
6.01.
Yeah.
So I think it's an important transparent question or discussion to have as we go through the budget in advance of town meeting and voters contemplating how many officers do we have and what service do we get as a result of that.
Does the current contract have take-home cruisers for new hires, or did we grandfather that? for
No,
existing?
the current contract has take-home
Okay.
cruisers for everybody. What we grandfathered in the current contract was distance driven of each cruiser.
Okay.
And I think new hires got like 30 miles away
Okay.
from work, I think. Anything over 30 miles they had to pay for, but anybody who was currently employed and living wherever was able to drive that number of miles.
And it has nothing to do with the contract, but what does Heinsberg do for cruisers? Are they take home?
They don't.
They're not take-home,
Okay.
no.
So just as a point of fact and legal status, we have an existing collective bargaining agreement, but we don't have a future collective bargaining agreement.
Right.
So absent
So
a future
that-
agreement, the current agreement takes place,
Yes.
right?
And part of my point is the future agreement does not yet exist and thus is subject to change.
That's correct. Yeah.
On that note, what we did do was added in down the bottom here. So, looking at our capital plan, we were due to replace a cruiser in FY 26. And the capital plan would call for $80,000 to go into the capital reserve. That's after 2 years of not funding that reserve. And in talking to Chief Cambridge, he says we have 2 Dodges that are in good shape, the Tesla's in good shape, and the 4 that would be due to be replaced is drivable, but you can tell it's showing its wear. So he feels that replacing that would be necessary.
But we're not to the doors falling off like we were on the ones we got rid of.
I don't think we're that bad, but he says when you drive it, you can definitely tell that it performs differently and sort of is a little clunky.
And furthermore, we don't have anyone to drive it.
There's
Point at
that.
this point. But by FY 26, hopefully, hopefully we're fully staffed. But the hiring environment for police is challenging.
And unfortunately, it's really hard to procure a police cruiser. They're only manufactured at certain times and they have
Yes,
to
if
be
we ordered one
outfitted
today,
certain
we'd be able to
ways.
get one 36 months or something crazy.
But then once you have it, it's worthless.
Especially if nobody's driving.
Sign me up.
For what is on vaguely related note, there's been a lot about the suitability of Teslas as police cars in the media lately, and the general consensus is, are you out of your mind?
Sorry, I should have laughed. It just feels like, yeah, there's been a lot of complaints about driving that and how useful it can be.
But
Right.
we've put a lot of miles on it.
As a commuter vehicle, basically, but
I mean, it served a purpose and it saved some money over another car, perhaps.
No, it has.
Yeah. All right, so maybe not much more to dig in here, and I'll make sure we have more department heads at the next one.
Connie, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just want to make a note that when we were talking about what we would increase for salary lines with the police because of the current contract, that was only 2% versus the 3% that we're doing for all other departments. And also on that capital reserve line, that would be 80,000 plus what we already have in there. So then if we didn't end up coming to full staff and needing that 4th vehicle, which should be replaced, then we could go right back to 0 the next year.
Why?
Why would we go back to 0?
Yeah.
So if we don't use it to replace the,
Oh, if we don't use it,
If we
okay.
don't buy a car.
right, if we end up not using it, we'll have enough in that reserve to pay for a full cruiser.
Okay.
So if we bump the whole schedule out a year, then we could either skip a year or cut it in half.
Okay,
Would it drive well if we cut it in half?
Probably about as good as it does now.
And
Jack, did you have a question?
What does the town suffer because we have fewer police?
Well, because we're able to share with Heinsberg, not much. If we
Yeah.
didn't have Heinsberg,
Yeah, but if we're sharing with Heinsberg, we certainly do not have our budget being used as fully as $912,000 seems to me, and it has seemed to be for 50 years, excessive.
part of the reason we have a projected amount of police that we do is because of the idea of Heinsberg could at any time decide not to renew the contract, and that's why we'd prefer to have our own police. Although we're happy with the working relationship, we'd like to have the insurance of having our own officers. And two, we want to, if we do wind up in that situation of having only our own officers, it's awfully nice to be able to have two on duty at the same time so they can back each other up.
And I think
Well,
right
back to
now,
my first question, what have we lost by not having, how has the
So-
town suffered by not having the police?
I guess without having Chief Cambridge here, I think 5 officers in Heinsberg and 1 here, I think they are feeling a bit stretched thin on trying to respond to calls. And I think one thing that we could use is more speed enforcement. I think, you know,
Yes.
that's the biggest thing that I hear is everybody's going too fast. We could use more speed enforcement. If we have more officers, we could do more of that. And one benefit of the flooding the last 2 years is I think it's really kept people out of the river from July 10th on.
Yeah.
So I think if we didn't have that flooding, we would have had a lot more parking problems on Dugway Road. We would have needed a lot more enforcement up there. And I don't know that we would have been able to respond to in the amount that's necessary to deal with that parking with just the officers we have now. So I think it's somewhere more than 6.
The flooding also slowed down the flow of traffic significantly in town. roads.
It did too, yeah.
so I think it is worth having this conversation with the chief, and it's worth, Jack, you coming back when we have this conversation about what's the right number of officers.
Yeah.
Not just for shift coverage, but activity. That what are they doing? What do we get for that other than on call in case something happens? And that is valuable. And maybe that's the core thing. But I would also say, I don't know how to say this, but as a resident of Tilden Avenue, I cannot tell you how many times I took a cut through the Catholic church driveway past a police car parked in the driveway. I don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that was ever a great investment of our police resources, waiting en route to at the Catholic church to catch speeders. It was a very frequent occasion. And then
But everybody knew you were there, so they could speed anywhere else in town.
And I heard from residents who lived on some of the secondary roads, I haven't seen a police car on my road in 5 years. And I think that has changed, so I give Chief Cambridge credit for some of those changes at least.
Yeah.
But I think that is the question about what service do we want? And when we say what services are we gonna pay for? I've always taken the view that what services does the town wanna pay for?
Right.
That's the question. Like, how much do you want? We're not gonna get to 24/7.
No.
Right.
So if it's not 24/7, what is it?
Right.
And I just think that's a fruitful conversation to have. And setting the stage both for the budget and town meeting.
Right, and that's before we add a river unit and the airborne unit. But anyway, yeah.
Anything else on police?
Not
Okay,
any?
to be continued. Highway, recreation and trails.
So I also don't see Pete here. Pete, are you here? Am I missing you? No. doesn't look
We
like it.
saw the forecast and he's putting chains on the trucks tonight.
Oh,
Is it
okay, when is it snowing?
tonight?
That's where you
Tomorrow-
are.
tomorrow night.
Oh, upper elevations though, only, okay. Yeah, I saw some pictures from some of the mountains that they've been getting some snow.
Killington got a good bit.
Yeah, I saw people doing some fast grass skiing, as we called it in the ski industry. Get your rock skis, we got fast grass. All right, so we'll go to, maybe we'll start with rec and trails first. It's sort of simpler and then we'll get into highway. Think, where do we go with rec and trails?
Wrecking trails.
As it goes sometimes, recreation and trails, really not a ton of changes here. We, just one reminder, we don't budget for the conservation reserve fund. That's voted on separately, so that's not in expenses right now. That'll be voted on at town meeting. Other than that, I think we made a small increase in some wages. But everything else is fairly flat or a very small increase. Percentages look higher, but the
What
numbers
about
are
Lake
pretty small.
Iroquois?
Lake Iroquois. So the district, so Jack, correct me if I'm wrong. I think
Thank you.
Lake Iroquois Association is the one that the town makes a voluntary donation towards. So you've got the request in the packet that you sent in.
Yes.
The district, you have the ability to levy a fee against the town based on the statute and the way that that is set up.
Yes.
So the district, we put in 3,000 without receiving a request, because we know that you'll send us a bill for $3,000 because you legally are allowed to.
Lake Iroquois, our LIRD is classified as a municipal district, and we have to follow all the same rules that you do.
Yeah.
I mean, yada, yada, yada.
Mhm.
Lake Iroquois Association is a volunteer organization, and they are responsibility, they've taken on the role of keeping the lake clean. LIRD takes care of the beach and the land where the hiking trails are. And that's about it. The cutoff that goes down to the fishing
Thanks, Tom.
access is a separate thing. But
I'm gonna grab a piece of pie.
incredible increase in use of the Lake Iroquois on all places. It's satisfying to me because canoes are kayaks and paddle boards are used a whole lot. A whole lot. And I'm amazed how much it's used. We sold like I think $5,000 worth of Lake Iroquois passes for the beach just to Richmond residents, which is, you know, there's a lot of uses, and those passes are used during the day in the summer. The rest of the time in the evening, there's people there all the time. It's a good resource, and I'm glad you support it.
I'm very impressed, Jack, at the amount of invasive plant life that you guys have managed to accomplish.
What's that?
The incredible work you guys have done at reducing the invasive plant life.
Oh,
I mean, it's just amazing.
well, that's in the past.
Yeah.
LIA or Richmond paid for the survey. It's a
Take some.
commercial survey of the plants in the lake. And we do it every year. And the years that we put for Selecor, we have 2 surveys, one before and one afterwards. Last summer, LIA spent around $4,500 for the surveys, and the Richmond Conservation Committee used to pay that. I don't know what changed. And LIA made a conscious decision to level fund to you guys because of what the cost of roads and road repair are to everybody, Williston, Heinsberg, Richmond, St. George. So that's why we're, LIA is level funding at 2,000. And I don't know why it stopped coming out of the Conservation Committee meeting. I don't have the history on that. Anyways, thanks.
Nor do I, does anybody?
I didn't know.
I thought they had an objection to using an herbicide, but I might be wrong.
Oh, that could be. That could be.
I will note that was controversial for a couple of years there, like getting approval. Yes, you can. No, you can't. Yes,
Oh,
you
it was a
can.
huge fight, big fight. And they changed the medicine,
The
they
herbicide,
went to Porcellicor
right?
and 24 hours after it's applied, they're shooting for 2 million, 2 parts per, 1 part per 2 million, and we were at 1 part the other way. It was twice as good as possible. It has been very good, and if you compare lakes that don't have it, there was a swamp there in the
Yeah.
beginning. I mean, the Eurasian water milfoil was, you couldn't paddle through it. But maybe that's the reason we're getting a lot more activity. because
Yeah,
it's a
I
cleaner
suspect it
lake.
is.
Hope they clean them both.
Beautiful now. You go to,
Yeah, it
I
is.
take my son fishing there at least once a week, and it's a beautiful lake.
The school has 4 different field trips there, and that's just the elementary school. I don't know what the middle school has or anything like that. And I think they do that because there's access for buses to go. But anyways, I'm here to say thank you and keep up the good work. And that's the last time you'll hear me say that.
Josh, did Andrews Community Forest say anything about improvements that they wanted to make? Because, I mean, they're in a bit of a spin right now, but.
So, no, I haven't heard anything from them
I mean, some of
directly.
the earlier this year, some of the meetings I tuned into, they were talking about repairing trails and some crossings and,
Oh,
you know.
would imagine.
But
They do have their own reserve fund that they can draw out of, so I haven't seen a budget request from them, so I
Who's
think
this? I didn't hear.
Andrews Community Forest, any
Oh, yeah.
trail improvements would be from their reserve fund, I think.
okay,
Sorry, I need to
I think they're
speak up.
But they
completely.
still have to come to us to get permission.
Yes, very good point and reminder.
That gives you-
And they also at a certain altitude and pitch were running into permitting
Mhm.
zoning things,
Mhm.
which I think were warned but not fully understood perhaps.
Well, the
I would
trails
concur.
over Lake Iroquois, Kim Conant, who's also on the board of directors, he and I go out and cut them up. You know, how many more years can I do that?
So maybe moving on to highway.
They do good work. I'm going.
Have a good night, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
On highway, we've made adjustments to staffing based on some staffing changes that we had this summer. So that then the associated benefits and taxes kind of flowed with those. I think one of the bigger questions we should talk about, let's see, is more about reserve funds here, I think.
Well, we've replaced all the culverts over the last 2 years.
Yeah, we sure feel like we have.
And I was talking to Josh about that a while back. Pete has basically every time one gets wrecked, we go up by 20%, right?
Yeah, he calls it going up one size, which I'm not sure, that might vary between a 12 to an 18 or a 2 foot to a 3 foot, but he usually increases the size.
Mhm.
as he. as
I
part of
just
that.
can't help wondering, and I am not Pete, nor will I ever be, but if it's not time to just like do 3 leaps at once, given the amount of water we've been having come through and how many are getting wrecked each time.
The great leap forward.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question and we should ask Pete
Okay.
about it, but like what we've seen that we've been successful in getting funding from FEMA by going up one size. If we start going up
Okay.
3, 4, but it's a good conversation to have because there might be mitigation funds from FEMA potentially if we went up higher. But there might also be more challenges there. But we also might be able to say, well, okay, if they just pay for, if they would pay for up one size and we go up 2 sizes, could we just pay the net? And is that worth it to the town? Based on Pete's judgment of what size culvert should be used in each location too, because he would obviously have an opinion on that, I'm sure.
I have spoken to Pete about this, and I don't want to speak for Pete, but Pete's had pretty good luck upsizing and re-engineering culverts, not only upsizing them, but also reinforcing them, putting in wing walls, head walls. We're not replacing the same culverts over and over. I'm not going to say that that's 100% true because I'm sure there might be a culvert or 2 that blew out, but overall, his track record of replacing culverts with upsized re-engineered culverts is pretty good.
Okay.
So it's not like we're chasing the same culverts. Well, we upsized it this much, let's try this much.
Okay. I'm just, no one has an answer for what the next decade's gonna be like flood wise, other than it's gonna be bad.
Yeah,
And so I'm just
Batter.
thinking, huh,
Batter.
better.
that's the consensus.
If there's anything we should be doing now to avoid total catastrophe in 2029, it would be nice to know. Are there things we have put off doing that maybe we should bite the bullet and do? And I don't know what those would be.
So it strikes me similar to a couple of other topics. This is kind of a parking lot for when Pete is here to talk specifically about culverts and flood mitigation. Because you're right, it's not just the size of the culvert, it's the installation of the culvert, right? And to talk about what we do, because not blowing out a culvert is a cost savings, even if the size and
Yeah.
installation is more expensive.
Yeah, it's a one-time.
First cost saves a lot of
Yeah.
second, third costs.
No, we still don't have cameras in the town garage, correct?
No, we don't.
Nor do we have cameras here, but you were pricing them, right?
Yeah, I think we have a RFP due tomorrow for locks and cameras, so we should have some
Great.
information for you guys soon. One question we had was on the new side, the two reserve funds here at the bottom, new sidewalk reserve and new transportation infrastructure. When the new sidewalk reserve was started, I think it was mostly started around the Bridge Street project. We were trying to budget for that based on what we needed for payment for those projects as well as for grants. I think there was some discussion about other sidewalks for new sidewalks as well, but it was mostly for Bridge Street. Right now, Bridge Street is not going anywhere with sidewalks. So we've also have a new transportation infrastructure reserve fund that town planner Keith Oborn is recommending we move money into, and that could be used for, we move the sidewalk money into that. And then it could be used for sidewalks or new infrastructure, like if we ever did anything at the THBC intersection or any other improvements like that.
Are the East Main sidewalks funded yet?
Those, where's he getting that out of? Connie, do you know where Pete's paying for those sidewalks? That might be under maintenance, actually.
You know, the ones that we were gonna put in 2014?
I'm aware of those. Which, don't we have a regular sidewalk reserve fund, Connie, that we were using for that?
We should.
Because we had bonded for those because they were scheduled to be. put in.
Sorry, stormwater and sidewalk. So I think that's where he was gonna use that
Right.
money for that. Yeah.
So
because-
stormwater and sidewalks is the routine yearly one.
Yeah, that's that's like maintenance on existing sidewalks, whereas the idea behind the new sidewalk reserve was for new sidewalks.
Pardon?
So currently, the new sidewalk reserve has 65,000 in it. So rather than contributing to either of those and talking with Keith, we were thinking if we move the new sidewalk one with the 65,000 into the infrastructure reserve, that would give a lot more flexibility.
So maybe this is another placeholder or parking lot for when Keith is here. But the CCRPC TIP Transportation Infrastructure Plan is just coming out. And I skimmed through it. There's like a $2.8 million side path project in Williston to connect the village to Taft Corners. And there is somewhere around 3 or 4 million in side paths scattered around Burlington. And it made me think, and a lot of that's federal money and state money. It made me think about our pinch points and this elusive, how do we connect the park and ride and transportation nexus with the village? I think we should not let that go. Unfortunately, these things are 5+ years from first phase to last phase. But I think of some of the things that we need to have some funding available to keep those pinch points and improvements moving. And frankly, in my opinion, to be pushing through CCRPC, the Agency of Transportation, to actually deal with the expensive improvements. And I still have a certain frustration. I see it happening in other towns because it's easier, there's more people there. But I think the issue is not going to go away for us as a town for bike pedestrian access all the way potentially to the mobile home park.
Yeah.
And I think that's a question for Keith and like, how do we move this forward? What do you suggest for budgeting? Because we'll need some Auntie or Kitty money to keep it moving.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the thought behind the new sidewalk was I remember Chris Cole talked about it. It was Bridge Street. And how do we budget for that? Because sometimes you get the TAP grants where they are covering 80%, but sometimes you don't. So what's the appropriate amount to put away now? So it can be a bit of a guessing game.
But if you don't have any money, you can't sit at the poker table.
That's also fair. You need to have at least a match and hopefully you can get
Yeah.
some of those, some of those reserves or some of those grants. So I don't know, I mean, we can think about the sidewalk for transportation. We can get Keith and Pete here for the next meeting and have a bigger conversation about that too.
Awesome.
So moving
I know
on.
that the Gateway Trails project that we heard from a while back had 4 or so routes, one of which was basically coming along from the school out there. And that would avoid the pinch points that we have along Route 2. Where did we leave that? The whole idea of exploring that? Because they presented to us.
Yep. I would have to follow up with Keith as to what the next steps are with that. I don't recall.
Because I don't know if I'm sure no engineering was done, but I think that was the preferred path to come from the school over. Does that ring a bell or?
I'll just point out, this reminds me of our water sewer
Yeah.
extension conversation. So we'll need money, we'll need engineering, we'll need easements.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
Gary Brescher's looking for money. That's right. When you said we need money and easements. So we do have that small committee that Gary's chairing that's
Okay.
looking at funding for that.
but if it's coming from the school down through the conserved lands
Yeah.
and the REIT property, there's at least 2 sets of easements.
Yeah.
And then if you go outside the right of way, you're gonna have to do easements all the way down.
And of course, complicating that is that the REIT property now is home to some very extensive storage units.
Mm-hmm.
And none of it's, you know, if we had $1 billion, it would be easy.
Monorail.
Yeah, that's
Um,
there you go, right over the interstate.
But I think it's still, how do we get there? And I, you know, kudos to Gary, because we gotta get there. What's the right path though? At what cost and what other obstacles and challenges? It's still, we'll have to get there. The end result, I think, is we're similarly we should have some money in the kitty. At least as match for initial engineering and project estimates.
All right, we're gonna go on to admin.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the biggest changes or proposed changes to talk about in admin relate to salaries. So town clerk Linda Parent has announced she's going to retire in March. So we've budgeted for a new town clerk, sort of assumed a grade and a step start for that person. We also budgeted for a deputy town manager at a grade 7 step C and included that in here. What I did was for this exercise, kept the assistant town manager as if Duncan's staying in that role. He would go up a step, and then we added a new position, which would be the deputy town manager. Duncan might move into that. We'll have to see if that gets approved, what would happen there. But then I didn't budget for the part-time position. It's a temporary position that Lynn Caroleo is in right now to continue on because that's part-time temporary. So as I was starting to talk with Jack a little bit, I think, right now, Lynn is pretty much exclusively focused on items related to the flood, EWP, home elevations, buyout programs, helping homeowners through those processes, working with the state, getting agreements in place, and also working on water and sewer and select board minutes so that Duncan can have more time to take over projects like RFPs for park installations, items for this building, and various other RFPs that we're looking to continue on with. So I think if this position were approved, some of that work that Lynn's doing would either fall to the new position or to the assistant to the town manager. Eventually that work is going to run out, I hope. But some of these projects are going to take a couple of years. But as we add, demands for, more sidewalks, more water sewer infrastructure, more renovations to this building, more park installations, there's numerous amounts of projects that need to be managed. Even some of the water sewer things, like if we look at the 20-year study, I'm sure that Steve's going to need some administrative help in that upgrade. I already put some time into that as well. So even though our population isn't increasing, there's definitely work that continues to increase. So, other than that, for admin, I don't think we made too many changes. That would be sort of the big one.
Bart?
A a question, then another discussion item. Fire protection
Mm-hmm.
seems to have gone down substantially. I can't remember why that would be.
Yep, because one of the loans that we calculate fire protection on
There
is
you go.
dropping off, and I think we pay like 5% of that loan, and
Yeah.
that loan is going away.
That's great. Thank you.
About the gap loan?
Connie, which loan was that? The gap loan? There you go.
Yep.
Yes, it was for the audio.
The other thing that I've been thinking about, and if you haven't been thinking about this, then you're somehow irresponsible, are the 3-acre stormwater issues.
Yeah.
What?
And I think in this regard, it's certainly issues around Southview where we have a role. There's issues in Greystone where the town has a role. And I just call it out. I'm not sure where to go with it, but how to budget those things in terms of what are upfront engineering
Yeah.
other than grants. And then do we want to start doing any kind of reserves for our responsibility? So that's the narrow, like keeping in our guardrails in our lane.
But yeah, we really need to do that because the money from ARPA is only going to pay for the permitting and the initial engineering and certainly not the whole project.
And then the larger question, I'm thinking back over the last year or two, we have sat in this room with a number of residents who have asked for support for flood remediation, mitigation on their private property. We have sat here with residents of Southview looking, some of them at least, looking for the town to pay for things on their private property. And I think I said this earlier, what should the town pay for? Well, I guess it depends what the voters vote to pay for.
Right.
And I just thought of this week. Should we contemplate an article that asks like what the voters think? Do you want to tax yourselves more money to pay for these things?
These
that
private roads.
are private property, not us. I think it's doomed to failure. But rather than us sitting in the way and saying, I don't think the voters would ever
It
vote
might
for
be good to
that.
ask the question though, and then
But I-
show the results.
I also wonder legally, what can the town pay for?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm with you.
Like even if the voters say, yeah, we want
Yeah.
to pay for replacement of all private bridges, which they may never,
Oh
but
boy, that would be
can
expensive.
the town actually go in and do that?
That would be
Well-
a good way to raise the issue to, you know.
That'd be a good way to
awareness.
bankrupt yourself.
I think you're right. I'm raising the issue here because how many times we've heard exactly this from.
And you'd like to
residents
just
and
get it settled.
taxpayers.
Or
and
settled as things can
We
be.
could say, as we have, it's not in the budget and we don't have the legal authority to do it. But I think we might at least more consciously entertain the question, maybe first with our attorney. It could be a grant program if the town wants to set this up, like charitable contributions. You want to set up a grant program and people can apply and you give some town tax revenue to people who are disadvantaged, whether it's 3-acre rule or stormwater damage. That is a piece of work. You'd have to pay for not only the funding, but the management of the funding and the awarding of the funding. I just, it's fairly, I'm being somewhat obtuse, but I think I'm harking back to how many times we've heard a similar request from a diverse group of residents.
And it won't stop
It would
because
raise the question.
next
in a way
10
that
year storms.
Would get an answer. I think.
I am thoughtful, especially given our recent history with the town center building. If people didn't want to pay for that, would they want to pay for private property stuff? I don't know, maybe they would. But it would be a way to put it to rest. I think that was your
Brings it
phrase.
out in the open and produces an answer that really nobody can argue with.
Well, maybe let's start with a consultation with the attorney. Is it worth doing that, folks? Like, at least to say, if we wanted to put it to the voters, is it viable to do so?
There probably need to be some explanation of what mechanism we think might work.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's,
Yeah.
which would be valid, but then let people think about it. Yeah.
So that's a very half-baked thought, but what do you
it's
think?
an interesting idea.
It's not the silliest thing that's been brought up here.
There you go.
Well, first, before we decide if we should ask if we should go there, we should find out if there's any path to get there.
Yes. Is it possible? And if it's possible, is it desirable? Like, and so that might be the first thing with the attorney to say,
Yeah.
is this harebrained scheme even plausible? Because frankly, we collect money and give it to other entities already through charitable contributions, so it's probably more similar to that than anything else.
Yeah, I was just thinking one way might be if there was a charitable organization that came up and said aid to private homeowners for property damage, and we gave them
Yeah,
$100,000 a year, and then they would accept applications that were independent of the town. They'd be their own 501(c)(3), and then they could dole out money as they saw appropriate. They would have a large job to do.
Yes. And I approach it with trepidation, but I'm first interested in what, if the voters have any appetite for that. And I suspect they won't, even though the impacted property owners want them to.
That would be a voice.
Well, we can run it by VLCT first to see what they think.
Yeah, there
That's
you go.
free.
Yeah.
And then, if we don't like that answer, we can talk to our attorneys.
All right, thank you.
Free is good.
Free is good, but sometimes you need more specificity. So we'll
But to
see.
go back to Bard's original point was putting money aside for whatever the next step of
Yeah.
the 3 acre is.
Then that's the narrower that, so you're right.
Yeah.
If I step back and say within our right of way, there's still expenses that will be borne by us at some
Very,
point.
because our town roads are there, that's
Yeah,
unavoidable.
so
And maybe that's a reserve fund for 3 acre rule compliance in the next budget, like
Yeah.
start putting some money away.
could either be reserved, or I was thinking we have stormwater and sidewalk budget line that maybe we need to increase by a certain amount for FY26, which we'd have to we won't have a real good estimate on by the time we close this budget, but we might be able to get some back of the envelope thing from Watershed Consulting as far as, you might expect to pay this much. And then factor in a split with the Southview residents and
At least start, like, even if it's
Yeah.
50 or 100,000, start stepping in
Yeah,
that direction,
'cause
because
we're gonna
we know
need-
we'll have some expenses.
we are going to have some expenses. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Let's see. So other than that, I guess let's look at assessors. We basically just budgeted a small increase, thinking that our contract for assessing services with Nemrick, their fees will likely go up as well as their number of hours. So other than that, pretty flat for assessors. Do you want to look at appropriations?
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
we're intending, well, a lot of what happens with appropriations is going to depend on the outcome of the town vote.
Yeah, so what I'll do here, if we'll go there, I'll just share this chart to kind of show what we got requests for, where things ended up, and which are on the ballot.
Awesome.
Bigger. Okay. So this is a full list of the requests that we received by, we set an early October deadline. And then I put notes over here as whether are they voted or in the budget. So obviously everything that says voted is not included in the budget. So like Agewell, COTS, Lund, our community cares camp, Steps to End Domestic Violence, Turning Point, Vermont Family Network, and Vermont Center for Independent Living. We determined last year those needed to be voted on separately. Then items like Little League, I think we put into the recreation budget.
Kusi went under
Koozie,
police.
Farmers Market was recreation. GBIC was general admin because they will help us with grants. Lake Iroquois was recreation. MMC TV was general admin. Thanks to all of their hard work with recording all of our meetings, which has talk about work that's ballooned since COVID. That work has ballooned since COVID. Community band is in recreation. Rescue we put under contracted health services. UVA Health Network, I think we also put under contracted health services. And we put them all in at their new request.
Okay.
And HopeWorks is not asked yet, and
Right.
these are, a couple of these are, Lund is new since
Lund
last
is,
year.
yeah, and Lund I think had been on in years past, but was
Yeah.
not on in last year for some reason. And yeah, maybe and then it's a determination if we get a late request. The deadline is really just for our purposes, so we have it by the first budget meeting. But the board could say, sorry, you didn't make the deadline, or they could say, slap on the wrist, but we'll move on. So maybe not a ton to talk about there.
Yeah.
But maybe there's something you guys see that you want more information on too.
It seems pretty straightforward to me that the items that are budgeted seem appropriate still for budgeting, and the things that are voted, it's similar to the conversation we just had. What do the voters want to pay for?
Yeah. All right. You want to talk about revenue?
Sure.
Before you do that,
Oh, sorry. Let me go
just
back.
the page just above this, right? The bottom line, as it were,
Oh,
on whatever page that is.
on the expense side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if our target were 3.4, just for a current course check, we're currently at 8.6.
For the
Expense.
budget expense increase, yes. Yep. Revenue, probably the biggest change we made here was in the net interest earned. We had been budgeting around 100,000 FY25, 14,000 FY24. The actual in FY24 was $203,000, and net interest earned is on general checking and on the CDs. We are budgeting for that to go down in FY26. Interest rates are coming down, and we do expect we'll probably have less money on hand to be buying CDs with, thanks to the 2024 flooding.
Let's just not have any more flooding.
That would be
Oh,
great.
I vote for that.
Other than that, I don't think we made any real big swings on revenue, but the one other thing to mention is last year we did have $433,000 that we used in unassigned funds. And in this budget, we did not put anything in for that yet because, as I said, we don't really have a good number on that yet. So the real hard number to look at, I think, then is what would the projected tax increase be? And that's where we're well above the number that Bar's looking at. So last year we were at, and let me see if I can make this bigger because that's pretty hard to see here. Oh, too big. Oops, it's too big. Okay. So last year we had 0.4969. This year we were projecting to be at about 0.682. Again, that's with no offset. So that's a 22.41% increase as presented. And as I noted, we're putting in a lot to the budget. What I did do is run a look at the tax rate and the use of unassigned funds, because I think that that's one of the things that's really been sort of artificially holding
Yes.
things down.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate to have that, but it's not a
Forever.
Right. So maybe I'll start with this one here. And this one I have to make bigger too, so bear with me. Okay. So this is a look at how much we've used of unassigned and restricted funds in each fiscal year. So, we were in the $25,000 to $161,000 range for 2019, 20, 21, and 22. When we first started really actively using this tool, a lot of it was offset of one-time expenses. As we got into COVID, we tried to do a little bit more. I think that's for the 160. Well, no, it wouldn't have been there yet. I think it was at 91,000. We started to think about, well, what can we do to kind of help the taxpayers out? And then in 23 and 24, we were at $919,000, $500,000 last year. And $433,000 in $433,000 in this fiscal year. So we've used quite a bit over the last 3 years, especially to kind of artificially keep the tax rate low. So what I then looked at was, if we look at the tax rate as presented, it's a 22.41% increase. If we look at the tax rate, if we added $433,000 in unassigned funds, it would drop to 11.42. Still not great, but it's about 11-point drop on the percentages. If we remove the 3 additional staffing requests for police, admin, and library, the increase would be 17.66. If we remove that and added in an equal amount of unassigned fund usage, we're getting down to 6.67. If we remove the 3 additional staffing requests and the $80,000 for the police cruiser, we're dropping to about 15%. If we then add in the 433,000, we're at 4.64. And then I wanted to just sort of see, well, what does that 433,000 mean? So I ran another one where I kept all expenses and all revenue completely flat to last year. So everything's completely flat. But I did take out the voted appropriations and the conservation reserve fund from FY26. And I did not include the $433,000 in unassigned funds. So that's 8.55% if everything was flat and we had nothing to use for unassigned reserve funds. And if we added the conservation and the appropriations back in, we're back up to that 10.99%, which is the number of points basically that the $433,000 buys us on the tax rate increase. So my point in going through this was to try to show a little bit more about that unassigned fund really makes a huge difference.
It does.
And I just sort of took a look at, what were the biggest increased asks here that weren't really capital related, because some of that is tied to the capital plan. So we've got, some of those went up for like fire and highway, but that's on a long-term purchase to avoid loans. So you don't have to do anything with this right now, but it just I thought it was illustrative to look at.
Yeah.
Where does this work? We can cry, that's fine. But I think a better solution would be after we get done crying, figure out what the heck we're gonna do about it.
Crying.
Well, we can only do so many coin drops.
Well,
We could do a 50-50 raffle at town meeting. That might get a couple $100.
yeah. So again, we'll have a better look at where we're at, with this flood, the previous flood, paybacks, unassigned and reserve and restricted funds at the next meeting. So we maybe don't have to cry too much between now and November, but when we get to November, that's when we're gonna have, I think, some harder decisions and in reality to look at.
Josh, any sense of how surrounding towns are faring? I mean, they're at about the same place we are as
I'm
budget
not
wise.
really sure how their budget discussions have been going.
Over the next month or so, you'll hear stuff.
At VLCT Town Fair, the consensus was due to the flooding, everybody's budget is gonna just be a train wreck this year.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is.
Art?
It just strikes me, so we're gonna do this higher level tweaks where, unassigned funds, yes, no. I'm also thinking of one of the things that frequently occurred in state government is you start preparing a cut list. If you had to reduce expenses, what are you gonna spend less on? And then maybe the voters have an appetite for an 8+% increase.
Not this year.
Nope.
But if they don't, then if they were to vote that down, it's an ugly path forward, right?
Yeah.
So it seems to me we still want to have this conversation, and I know every department has ideas on things that are valuable, but it's also, are these things nice to have or gotta have?
Yeah.
And I don't have a specific example, but I think that's the kind of conversation to have. And I don't want to go back to what I've seen at times in the past. Oh, well, just cut all maintenance or,
Just don't even start that.
No. I mean,
Costs more in the long
the
run.
other side of it is at some point, if we can't use unassigned and restricted funds, there's gonna be a larger tax bump than we'd like.
Yeah,
Just because if that money goes away, again, it's artificially been holding it down for 2 years to a tune of about $500,000. And this might be the year, because of the 2 floods in a row, that
It catches up to us.
either goes away or we have a lot less to work with. So the other side of that conversation could be, look, like, we like all the services we get, we want to make sure we maintain those services. We're gonna have to pay a little bit
But
more.
as a narrative, Josh, I mean, those floods, everybody knows about them.
Mhm.
And everybody knows they're expensive. We put a number to it, which is realistic.
Yeah.
There you go. It's not something we made up or
No.
made a mistake on. The other thing is people are gonna forget, we haven't got FEMA reimbursement. We will eventually, for
Right.
2 or 3 years or whatever. So somewhere.
Yeah.
But that's gonna just get, FEMA's
Yeah,
gonna be
we-
reimbursing us
we creep our
for
way
2 years ago flood, which we will then spend on that year's flood.
Right.
Right, and that's sort of, that's
It's
like
a
actually
forward-
exactly,
backwards.
because we are starting to get paid more for the 23 flood right now, which is helpful. And I learned today that the spending freeze from FEMA was lifted, at least for Vermont. So I don't know if you recall that we talked about there's gonna be a freeze in obligations. Well, our program manager told us today, oh, no, you're getting obligated for these other projects right now, so you'll see money. So apparently it's been lifted. I said, even in the wake of 2 major hurricanes, but yes, apparently we're gonna start to get money or more money from 23. So we're almost to the end of that, which is great news, because we're gonna start to see some money coming in. We do still have a couple of projects to complete from that, Dugway Road and the old Jericho Road recreational trail. We're getting money for those. We have to use that to pay for that in the future. And I do hope that the 24 will move a little quicker. If we keep our same grant program manager who we met with again today, and Duncan and Pete continue to be extremely well organized, I think we're gonna move through that process a lot quicker. It still means we probably won't see money until next spring at the earliest. But it might move, fairly well.
So I think you're right. You implied a sort of fork in the road. Are we going to really try to come back to our target? Or are we going to say this is a one-time sort of course correction?
Yeah.
All these annual one-time excess revenue, if we reach a year where we don't have that, it truly is a course correction. And if this is that year, that's our story. But it also hinges on how do people view that.
Yep.
That it's been an artificial sort of supplement to our revenue. And yeah, we always knew it wouldn't last forever. It was prudent while we have it.
Yeah.
It's prudent to use it versus just accrue it.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation. I don't know how well it goes over with voters. Depends on their mood and their finances, right?
I agree.
Yeah, as we fully staff the police department, we won't have those, we're contributing toward Heinsberg anyway, but one of the things that got us that money was not paying for police officers. And so that obviously wasn't going to last forever unless we gave up on having police.
Well, that's why this is what is in the back of my head thinking about arriving at this point. That this is why we need to have this very direct conversation with the chief about how many officers do we need? Jack Lynn's comment here, what are we not getting with the current number of officers? And if people don't see a difference, then they think it's okay with less coverage, maybe they want to pay for less coverage.
Well, one thing that there's a bad habit towns can get into, and this is very common in the South, where the police department exists to issue speeding tickets and nothing else. And then the money received from the speeding tickets pays for the police department, and you get this vicious circle. But that right now is, to your point, you said it earlier, the bulk of the requests you get from citizens about what to do with the police is please control the speeds on my street.
It's sort of off topic, but the revenue that's been generated by writing tickets until very recently has gone to the state, not the town.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of money because they take a portion of it, so there's not a ton that comes
That's a
back.
good point.
But I think it's interesting. I don't know,
Well,
before I
should they?
moved to Richmond, people were like, oh, there's always a cop here, there's always a cop there. I should have felt like it was a speed trap down. Well, I think the pendulum swung maybe a little bit further in the other direction, and we need to I do think we need to swing it back a little bit, because I know that every time when I came down Cochrane Road to drop my kid off at daycare from Bolton, there was 3 times out of 5, there was a cop sitting there in 25-mile zone. So I knew, before I knew anything about Richmond, I knew
Well,
25 on Cochrane Road.
On my morning commute into South Burlington, there was always a cop at the fire department, always.
Yeah. So, and that, it does change behavior. It does work.
And it's not like Richmond was in the top 10 revenue generating speeding ticket
I can't
towns
tell
in
if you're
the state.
joking.
No, we were 11.
Oh, okay.
You know, that deal about the money going to the state may be intentionally meant to disincentivize towns from basically.
That was the way the tickets were written.
Well, yeah, but you know, the whole thing about towns having this vicious circle of hire more cops to write more tickets, so we can pay for more cops. If the money's going to the state, there's less incentive to do that.
Mhm.
But yeah, but I do think there needs to be sort of that happy medium where you have enough for enforcement.
Yeah.
And if we have a normal summer, a floodless summer, I'll say,
Oh.
next year, parking is going to blow up again. You know, I mean, the last 2 4th of Julys, it sort of seems to be the kickoff, and our officers were out there writing tickets.
Lasts a week.
And it lasts a week, and I get 2 or
Then we
3
get a flood.
appeals, and we deal with those, but like, that would last for 2.5 months if we didn't have the high water, I think,
Yeah.
but.
And I think you're right, but this is exactly the conversation to have. What coverage and services do we want to pay for?
Yeah.
And you know, maybe people, including me, everybody, it's like, oh, well, there's no problems. You don't need any police. There's no parking. There's no, you know, river recreation. But it really, I think it at least is foundational for that one department. Like, how many officers do we want to fund and cruisers along with it?
Yeah.
And then the admin as well too, that's
Yes.
sort of the biggest driver right now, of an increase in police. If we didn't have that in there, I think we'd be,
Law
It would
enforcement's
come out,
expensive.
yeah.
Health insurance is expensive.
Yeah.
Staying competitive with other towns in terms of salary is expensive.
Mhm.
And those are the things we just unless we want to just junk having civic government, those are things we can't cut. As soon as we say we'll just stop increasing salaries, we have a whole bunch of empty positions that we can never fill.
Right, well, at some
And
point.
as soon
you
as
don't
we
even
start,
have to-
as soon as we start saying, we're now only going to do a 50-50 contribution to health insurance, boom, empty positions.
Mhm.
And those are the bulk of the increase. There's just absent a new revenue source, it is what it is. And I hate saying that.
And if you take a few key people out of town government, the rest of it doesn't even function well. So
Yes.
you get half of what you're paying for.
Like, for example, without Connie,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
things are just going to.
Oh, we'll get late
I
fees.
think we often underestimate by a lot how much Connie actually does. And if
She
Connie,
saves us a lot of money by paying things.
well,
up
right, but
front.
the thing is, if we don't pay employees like her what they're worth,
Yep.
Connie will go to some place where she can get paid what she deserves. And
Yeah.
taxpayers often, because, you know, to them, it's a bottom line. They're getting a bill, but they don't realize the alternative. And none of us want to pay higher taxes, but it is what it is.
And unfortunately, we can't hold our breath waiting for universal health insurance.
Yeah.
Or
That's-
climate change to roll off.
Any idea what the school budget is looking like? The tax, I mean, I'm sure there's noise, ground noise, but.
Yeah, I don't, have they started their budget meetings? I'm not even, I should know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If only I knew somebody on the school board. But yeah, no.
At least benefiting from it.
What's that?
They're benefiting from it, so. I mean, indirectly.
I'm benefiting from the school budget?
Yeah,
Oh,
your
with the
kids.
2 kids,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, but my wife's also on the school board, so I should know more about where they're at with the budget process, but we don't talk about it a whole bunch.
There's only so much you can fit your head at one time.
Good
You got
plan.
the whole-
I usually let her, I'm like, okay.
Go ahead, Connie.
I just wanted to point out a couple of things. When it comes to the reserve, some of them look like they're really high, but if you look through, you'll see a lot of our loans are gone. I think we're down to 1 year left on the 2005 fire truck and 2 on the 2018, and a Millet Street loan and a Jericho Road loan, and that's it. All of Pete's equipment ones are gone. So that's why those reserve numbers are jacked up, so that we have the money in a couple of years to be paying for it. I also thought back to what Jack was saying in the beginning about all the extra staff, and I'm really not seeing it. I mean, I've been here 13 years, and part of it may look that way because we've had vacancies for so long in the water and sewer department, and we've seen hours go up in a couple of positions up to this budget, but we really haven't added more bodies. And in regard to health insurance, right now, today, we have 14 eligible employees. And of the 14, in November, 5 of those will be doing opt-out. So part of the reason why those health insurance lines are so high is because we're predicting two-person policies for vacant positions.
Yeah.
So
Which
those
is-
could come in at an opt-out, or they could come in at a single, or they could come in at a family.
And so two thoughts. First, that last one, so that has the potential of baking in some savings or avoided costs, right? The other thing that I wanted to say, though, it might be useful to get to this concern about the inflation of the number of employees, to just deal with that head on and say, by fiscal year, how many positions did we have funded? And go back 5 or 10 years and say, there is the objective evidence of the growth of
Government.
the number of town staff.
Mhm.
It seems like that's a little bit of work, but possible to do. Does that make sense as
It
a
does.
useful exercise?
That would be a useful, to
Yeah.
everybody to understand numbers, employee numbers, that's pretty much what it is.
And I think going back at 5 or even, I'm not sure,
However many.
however many years,
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, I think to Connie's point, really, we've increased hours for zoning and for the planner and for the administrative assistant. But since I've been here in 6 years, we haven't added, other than Lynn for the part-time temporary position. Can't think we've added anybody.
Well, to show it in FTEs, right? Because then you'd see that slight variation of, is it 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours? And
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
that modest growth is
Mhm.
frankly probably more cost effective than a whole brand new position.
Sure,
but
yeah.
At
Yeah.
least going from 30 to 40.
Well, yeah, and I think it helped us retain a zoning administrator for longer than a year or two, too.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
used
there's a
to-
hidden cost in retraining or mistakes.
Yeah.
made.
Yeah, I mean, because before, when I first got here, that person was split with Huntington.
Yes.
Huntington or Heinsberg?
Huntington.
Huntington, I think.
Huntington.
Huh.
And they were like, their paycheck in Huntington was like all health insurance. And like they worked 20 hours here and like, I don't know how the heck she did it. But you can imagine that frustrating. And now we've got somebody who's here and it's been, I think Tyler's been here 3 years now, maybe.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you know, he's learning and growing and.
He's a bulldog. too.
Seems
I mean,
fairly
Yeah.
happy.
He's good at what he does.
Connie, does that seem like a useful exercise, FTEs by year?
Do you want to go by what we budgeted or what we actually had, or both?
Both.
Geez, now that you
Of
ask,
course.
both is cool.
Now, another piece to add to all this, and I wouldn't even know how to factor that in, is we have a library director retiring in a couple of weeks. The next person isn't going to be able to do that work in the same amount of time. We have a town clerk retiring in March.
Hmm.
That's going to have a really high learning curve. I'm going the next March. And Pete may very likely go within a year after that. So you're talking people that have adapted, that can do the job very efficiently and timely with new people they're going to have a learning curve. They can't be expected to do the same.
Always with the negative waves, Moriarty.
No, that's positive. We're working extremely efficiently right now. See?
I have one suggestion, which happens, not commonly, but for this example of a complex position with kind of a legacy incumbent. In state government, there's sometimes called a double fill, where you have the people overlap by like a month. So the newbie gets oriented by the oldie.
Mm.
I don't know if that's something to consider. It's just something that comes to mind when you talk
money well
about that
spent.
transition.
But I don't know if the new person, if they're locked into the starting date and Rebecca's ending date is, I don't know if that's possible in this.
I think I'm letting go of the library. That's
Okay.
their thing.
Yeah.
It's literally controlled by the trustees. I'm thinking more for,
Connie,
I guess, Connie and Pete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Linda.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
that like a month overlap in some of these things doesn't work because we do so, like Linda's driven by elections, town
Mhm.
report.
Yeah.
My
But
job's
you don't have to
driven
be there.
by all kinds of quarterly deadlines.
So I'm aware of that, and I'm thinking of like commissioners, deputy commissioners, division directors, people who go through annual cycles, legislative work. And so you're not with them the whole year, but you get an orientation where they can go through the work plan for the year and say, this month you do this, this is how you do it. This month you do this. And my only point is you can't do it for a year.
Yeah.
But can you do it for a week or 2 or 4? That is something that we probably afford and might be prudent if we thought it was worthwhile.
Yeah, maybe even like a small retainer to like be able to call them during the election and be like, hey, I need 2 hours of help. Okay.
Yeah.
Clock in for your whatever it is per hour for a couple hours, help out if the outgoing person is willing.
On
But
the
I think
subject-
some sort of transition plan is a good idea.
On the subject of Linda, this is a position we absolutely can't do without a town clerk. We have to have one. We want somebody who knows what they're doing or can fake it pretty well. And there's not that much time till town meeting day. Have we thought about, I don't think anything's been posted to Front Porch Forum saying FYI people, but we need to find a town resident who's willing to even consider doing this. And if we wait till the middle of February and say, oh, by the way, we're going to be hosed.
Yeah, well, they really need to be on the ballot by the end of January.
Right.
So I think, yeah, some sort of outreach plan to talk
Yeah.
about, come talk to Linda, see what it's about, maybe be interested, here's the pay range. would be
So
helpful.
maybe we
Does it
should
have
have
to be
this
a resident?
conversation with Linda.
Yeah,
Because in some ways, the best person to sort of float this out there is Linda herself. So I don't know if any of you have had this conversation. I have not.
Well, I know that
At
her
least I have.
assistant is not eligible because she does not live in Richmond as far as
no, she does,
she does.
yeah,
Adriana?
Adriana, yeah, she lives up near me.
Okay, I stand corrected. I don't know if she'd be interested, but that would be a conversation to have
Yeah, it'd be an
too.
obvious thing to ask her. Yeah.
And that may be Linda's sort of de facto succession plan,
Mhm.
but I don't know that.
Yeah, and I guess, on that, like, as far as like whoever wanted to run for it would probably want to know like what's the salary, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know how you negotiate with an elected official for salary. But so my only thought was right now, the town clerk is at grade 7 on the pay grade. If we say starting salary is, grade 7, step A. And, but based on experience could be more, because I imagine there'd be some sort of process if, okay, I'm elected, but they would maybe come to the select board to say, I should be at step C because of these factors. I don't really know, but I think we can at least start with grade 7, step A, because that's where it's slotted, and then.
Would you translate that into cash money?
Yeah, sure. So step C, which is sort of where we're budgeting, is about $79,000. So what's 5% lower than that? It's like 75-ish thousand probably. I don't have the grid in front of me.
Yeah,
Connie might
more or
have the
less.
grid in front of her, but I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
And members of
And
the
then-
select board cannot be the town clerk, right?
I think that's
Correct.
accurate. Yeah, because you can't be, yeah, I think that's.
It's a statutory.
There goes,
position,
there goes that plan. You're retired. You got all this time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No, I'll
that-
talk to Linda about it and then see, and if you guys want to, we can add it to an agenda and talk about advertising for that position, or at least getting the word out.
How about this? What, could we invite her to a future meeting and she can participate virtually and just have a conversation? The benefit of here, it's warned, it's public, and it gets a little more,
Yeah,
gets airtime from at least some people or for
It
some.
may attract attention from someone we didn't expect.
Yeah.
maybe I'll see if she can make it, next Monday.
Awesome.
Mondays doesn't look like a crazy agenda, so we might have some time to talk.
Where's the fun in that?
We'll find something, Jay. Give me 48 hours. All right.
Are we ready to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconds.
I'll make a motion to a vote. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Bart, aye.
Lisa, I.
Jay, I.
Let me get this one.
Adam, you still awake?
Adam's laptop.
Oh, Adam, but
Hey
All
there.
right.
do it again.
Did you vote?
Oh, there we go. Adam, I.
Very confusing.
David, we are adjourned.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would be grateful
Thanks,
if
Connie.
anybody who wants to take some would.